"1978 saw disco raw resplendent, every polyester leisure suit, every gold-plated pendant, every chest open shirted and hairy. We all scoured the dictionary for words to explain the phenomenon ascendant." Newsflash, people, it is 20th of March 1978 and some of the biggest hits we have ever seen are on the chart this very week. Come on, disco down to the boogie wonderland with me. We begin with a segment that just fell out of the coconut tree. Hello and goodbye! And in a viewer-suggested change, we begin with the songs that have left the top 10 this week. And it's a couple of the classiest ladies we've ever seen on the chart going out hand in hand as Linda Ronstadt's Blue Bayou departs alongside her good friend Dolly Parton's Here You Come Again. Linda dropping from 8 to 12 after reaching number 3, and Dolly from 10 to 13 after 2 weeks in the 10, rising no higher than that initial position. Here You Come Again was written by Barry Mann and Cynthia Weil, the heroes of TRB 105. They are replaced by danhill's Sometimes When We Touch, a record that at the time I just felt in my bones would be a number 1 hit. Little did I know, this song was co-written by none other than that man, Barry Mann. What Cynthia was doing at the time, I know not. Barry's like, "Hey Dan, if you need some help with the lyrics, I have one of the greatest lyricists ever literally next to me on the couch." And Dan's like, "No way, old man. I have poetry in my soul that needs to be expressed. I need to share my profound thoughts with the world," like, or maybe something like that. It was accompanied by a record which at the time made me sit straight up in my chair and go, "Hello, this is an interesting development." Simply one of the greatest records ever made, "Stayinalive" by the Beegees. Destined for 7 scorching weeks at number 1. This is still a record that will make me get up and dance every time I hear it. And my legs don't work properly, so that's quite a feat. But believe it or not, 7 weeks on top, and this isn't the biggest hit we're going to see this week. The biggest eventual hit entering the charts this week, one of 5 A-sides on the chart this week that have Barry and Robin Gibb in the writing credits, is If I Can't Have You by Yvonne Elliman, which made number 11. A chart rise probably hampered by the fact that the same song was the B-side of Stayin' Alive. The biggest hit leaving was David Soul's Silver Lady, a one-time number 5 hit. And the next number 1 hit, Minute Babysitter Twins by Mob, is a bit of a cheat. I couldn't get a decent anagram out of the song title and artist, so I included its current chart position as well. Answers at the very end if you get stumped, but I don't think you will be. You're all very clever. Number 10 this week is our Canadian friend Dan Hill, who bounds up from 17 with Sometimes When We Touch. A fairly handy-sized hit. It stuck around in the top 10 for 10 weeks, but it got no better than 3, which is fair enough considering the competition it had on the chart. Hill went on to more success in his homeland, both as a singer and a songwriter, but was absent forevermore from the Australian charts. At 9, it's Carlysimon with one of the better-remembered James Bond themes, Nobody Does It Better, from The Spy Who Loved Me. 5 weeks in the 10 for a top of 8. What is curious here is that the film had been released 7 months before the song made the top 10, which would indicate that the song made the 10 on its own tuneful merits rather than the considerable enthusiasm which accompanied the film. In fact, it was the first Bond theme not to have the movie's title within its title. Carlysimon was sort of a proto-Taylor Swift, trust fund baby who decided to become a pop star, and while she hasn't quite ascended to the heights Swift has, and frankly, who else ever has, she's had a long and dependable career and has always struck me as an eminently sensible kind of character. 8 is this week's Less Said the Better entry, Needles and Pins by Smokie. This is exactly the song that Smokie were destined to record a version of. I don't know why, despite being on Rack Records, my favourite label, one day I'll do a special on them, I have never ever warmed to Smokie. No idea why. Anyway, this one spent 5 weeks in the top 10, 3 of them at number 7, before sliding out of the top 40 rather quickly thereafter. They still had a few more hits in them into 1979, but by decade's end, they'd ended as a hit-making force. At number 7 is How Deep Is Your Love by Beegees, another one of those records that unaccountably never made number 1. Any other year, even 3 months either side of this chart, this would have been a solid number 1. But on this chart, it sat behind 4 different number 1s and 6 different number 2s, including 2 songs written by the Gibb brothers themselves. Suffice to say, it's an elemental record of its age. It's the centerpiece, really, to the movie Saturday Night Fever. And 10 weeks in the top 10 and 25 on the charts all up makes it one of the defining songs of 1978. Oh God, it had to come to this. Mull of Kintyre by Wings, an 11-week number one only recently deposed and a song I loathe to the core of my soul. Not that it's without virtue, it shows Paul McCartney's supreme gift for a tune, and my grandfather, whom I adored and people are constantly reminding me that I've managed to turn into as I've gotten older, loved it. He especially liked the video. "Get your wife and baby in it with the bagpipes," he used to say. It's how you sell a record. And the B-side, Girls' School, rock. But the song, perhaps better than any other, manages to embody what John Lennon called McCartney's granny music. It's Yellow Submarine all over again, but God did it dominate the charts. Using my scoring algorithm, this is the fourth biggest hit we've seen so far, bettered only by 1978's You're the One That I Want, I Want to Hold Your Hand by the actual Beatles themselves, one of whom, believe it or not, played on Mull of Kintyre, and it wasn't Ringo, and Fernando. It's time now for the Trade Up, where we look at records on this week's charts which did not make the top 10 but were surely good enough to have. And usually this is due to local record buyer being an idiot, but this week the top 10 was just so hot. There was a huge backlog of great or interesting records that just didn't make it.
If you change your mind, take a chance, I'm the first in line. Honey, I'm still free.
Take a Chance on Me isn't one of ABBA's better hits, but the fact that it didn't even endanger the top 10 is a stark illustration of just how far the band's fortunes had fallen. It was the first single to miss the top 10 in 10 of their releases. The next single, Eagle, didn't even make the top 40. Andy Gibb, coming off a 7-week number one with the sublime I Just Want to Be Your Everything, missed the top 10 with its follow-up Love Is Thicker Than Water, which punked out at 13. It made number one in the USA regardless. Carpenters hadn't had a top 20 single since 1975, so we shouldn't have been too surprised when Calling Occupants of Interplanetary Craft only made number 13. But come on, this is Carpenters here we're talking about. They rock! ELO were solid gold hit merchants in 1978, yet somehow Sweet Talkin' Woman stiffed at number 31. Now, I'm no big ELO fan, but this is one of their better ones, I would think. While Pop's old guard was getting the cold shoulder, the new wave wasn't faring much better, with sneering specky Elvis Costello's Watching the Detectives maxing at 35, and Tom Robinson stomping 2, 4, 6, 8 Motorway, going all the way to number 12 before running out of road.
Red dogs under illegal legs. A Johnny driving rain on the winter frame. Little young lady's daughter's teaching her right.
But the biggest shock has to be David Bowie's Heroes, which slid off the chart this week, having done no better than number 11. One of the best loved songs of the best loved artist, who had toured Australia to huge crowds that very year. Number 11. That's some kind of crime. Anyway, forestall your rage because it's back to the countdown at number 5 with Surfin' USA by Leifgarret. Garrett couldn't really sing, the band is unenthusiastic, but he's following of 14-year-old girls who thought he was a spunky spunk rat and were always pestering you to get your hair flicked like him because what apparently had made you look a spunky spunk rat yourself. Kept this in the top 3 for 6 weeks and made it one of the biggest hits ever by my algorithm, never to have made number 1. He did redeem himself a little in 1979 with the surprisingly good I Was Made for Dancing, but I think that's enough for the moment and we might move on. Be glad we did, because it's beegees with Stayin' Alive, one of my top 10 songs of the 1970s, and one which is burned into my consciousness in the way few songs ever have been. As I said, the first time I heard this, I craned over the radio, rigid in fear of missing a single millisecond of it. But disco wasn't cool, so I dared not breathe a word of it to my friends and had to hide the 45 whenever they came over and began auditing my records for uncool sounds. I also had to hide my copy of Steely Dan's Asia and the Royal Scam under my bed for the same reason. We used to do that to each other. Kids can be dicks sometimes. Anyway, this record is one of the reasons I'm so comfortable with cognitive dissonance. The song had the same drum track as More Than a Woman. Drummer Dennis Byron had to leave the session early as his mother was ill, so R.B. Gluten, Morris and Barry poured over the breakdowns he'd recorded, looking for just the right section to make a tape loop of, which they did to complete the track. They later reused it in Barbra Streisand's Woman in Love. The boys credited the drum part to Bernard Lupe, a pun on the famed drummer Bernie Purdy. So many producers contacted them because they couldn't find the drummer to book him that the boys eventually had to let the secret out of the bag. But this was the first major hit to record using a drum loop, and to this day is one of the most natural feeling ones. Awesome stuff, awesome record. At 3 is another Gibb Brothers song, Emotion, for Melbourne gal Samantha Sane, or Cheryl to her mum, or Shezza, no doubt, to her mates. This one peaked at number 2 last week. A long-time friend of the Gibbs, she made a choice to position herself away from them when she came to record the supporting album for this single, while still saying managed by Robert Stigwood. She still lives in Melbourne today. Number 2 is the British band The Beegees, who are a pretty good, not quite hard rock band who knew how to put a tune together. They had 2 hits, this and next year's Every Time I Think of You. The problem for me is if I try and think on either of those songs, I can't tell them from one another. But hey, nobody knew that back then, and this would hit number 1 next week, staving off the rampaging Staying Alive as one of the best underdog stories of the top 40 era. This was a good-sized hit, 10 weeks in the 10 and 19 all up on the charts, and may have done even better were it not for those pesky Gibb boys. The word trivia is a plural noun, so that immediately renders this sentence grammatically awkward. Here's some more awkwardness. Every member of the Beatles was in his 20s when the band broke up. The words unique, infinity, nauseous, married, spherical, and anonymous do not have a direct, strictly contextual opposite in the English language. There's a common story that goes around on the internet that in 1672 the Dutch people rioted and killed and ate their Prime Minister, Johan de Witt. This is not true. Johan de Witt had been the Grand Pensionary of Holland, a role in no way analogous with modern Prime Minister. But they did kill him, and his brother, and ate them, or bits of them anyway. I hope that whets your appetite for some real trivia.
It's Val's fantastic world of fact.
Biggest riser this week is Billy Joel with Just the Way You Are, jumping 11 spots from 31 to 20. Billy Joel was the first rock artist to crowd surf. He invented it on his famous tour of the USSR to show the crowd how much he loved them. Speaking of the 5'4" Billy Joel, the biggest faller this week is Short People by strapping 6-footer Randy Newman. Hopefully he never ran into Xboxer Billy, who may have wanted to avenge the insult in the most manly fashion. Biggest debut this week is Bob Welch's Ebony Eyes with its rumbly riff. Welch had been a member of Fleetwood Mac in the early to mid-70s, replacing Jeremy Spencer, until 1975 when he resigned from the band and was replaced by Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks. He got on well with the band though and remained their opening act through the glory years of the late 70s and early 80s. He was hopeful of being included with the band in their Hall of Fame induction, but the HOF committee put the kibosh on that. Anyway, this one got as high as number 2, another one that withers in the shadows of Staying Alive. And the longest running song on the 40 this week was another Canadian, Patsy Gallant, whose New York to LA disco-ish confection hung around for 27 weeks, all the time getting no higher than number 10. In the USA, it was Aussie domination, as Humpy Bong's favourite sons, the Bee Gees, are in the middle of a 15-week run of number 1s with Gibb-penned songs. At this point, the first of Night Fever's 8 weeks on top, following 4 for Staying Alive, then 2 for Andy's Love is Thicker Than Water, and a week for Yvonne Elliman's If I Can't Have You. It took Paul McCartney's frankly tepid with a little luck to end the run. Poor Macca, his mojo was well and truly gone by this point. By mid-June, Shadow Dancing by Andy enjoyed another 7 weeks on top. Add in a week for How Deep Is Your Love, which was number 1 for the first week of January, and you have 23 weeks at number 1 for the year, plus 2 more weeks for How Deep Was Your Love at number 1 in 1977. The previous record was 22 weeks by the Beatles in 1964, and 2 weeks of that was for 8 days a week in early 1965. It's a bit apples and oranges, but it gives you some idea of how dominant the boys were in that year. In the UK, it was the highly divisive Kate Bush who held number 1 with Wuthering Heights. Why divisive, you ask? Well, due to the way that she completely split my peer group as to who was our spunkiest spunk rat in the top 40, of course. While Kate turned many ahead, we, Debbie, Harry, Die Hard, stood our ground most determinedly. It was indeed Wuthering Heights, and the B-side was great too, that ended Staying Alive's run on the top of the local charts as well. This time last year, it was Mary McGregor's Torn Between Two Lovers at number 1, a tribute to Analysis Paralysis. And the next year, we would be getting down hard to Chic's La Freak. By then, disco was acceptable, so much earnest boogieing was accomplished in the name of this song. And the number 1 album in town this week, soon to be deposed by Saturday Night Fever, was Simple Dreams by Linda Ronstadt. I'm a little undecided about Linda. I feel she wasted so much of her potential in the mid to late 70s being America's jukebox. But my mother loved the hell out of this album and played the cassette day and night. Great voice, occasionally great singer. Wowie zowie, that was epic. So let's have a little fun. You're about to hear 6 of the most memorable songs of 1978. They are all very well-known songs, but you're just going to hear the drums and bass. First the drums, then the bass. 6 seconds of each. They're both taken from the same 6 seconds. The only thing I've done is boosted a few of the bass lines. The first 2 will be pretty easy, I think. The middle 2 are a bit tougher, and the last 2, well, the last one amazed me how little it sounded like the finished song. So, Scout's Honour, no Shazam or anything. Let's see how many of them you can get. Answers at the very end. So here's one act you only need to hear the drums to know. Monty the Safety Monkey with this week's number 1. Number 1 is good old Bonnie Tyler with the last of her 4 weeks for It's a Heartache, a song that did for Mull of Kintyre at number 1. A pretty big hit in its own right, certainly in the top 10% of the ones we've ever featured here. It spent 11 of its 18 chart weeks in the top 10. This was the first record Bonnie made with her husky voice, the result of vocal cord surgery, and it fought off 2 competing versions to make the charts. And it's a wonder that it did. RCA could barely press any copies because they'd switched over their operations to pumping out records by the recently deceased Elvis Presley. But it made the top 5 all over the world and ended up selling about 6 million copies. Nice work, Bonnie. Well, if that isn't 3,107 words of quality infotainment, I don't know what is. That's a lot of cabbage, but the cow ate it all this week. Remember to wait around to the end for the quiz answers, and remember too that should the good Lord be a-willin' and the creeks don't rise, we'll be back with another episode next week. Kish.